Okay, good evening. Let me just share my PowerPoint. Is it working?
Yes, Pastor.
Okay, thank you. So again, good evening, everyone, and thank you for having me again to speak for another topic here in RCM. And I actually have a few things that I want to cover, but I want to leave time for Q&A. So we have limited time, so I'll proceed to our topic. And my aim is to demonstrate that humanism on secular ground is actually a myth. And there are three things that I want to answer for our discussion this evening. The first is, what is secular humanism? Second, why secular humanism is a myth? And thirdly, why Christianity, I believe, is the only justification for a true humanism. So let's get started with the first question, and that is, what is secular humanism? Actually, broadly speaking, humanism is a commitment. It is a shared moral or ethical commitment which centers on the welfare of human beings. So those who say that they are humanists would typically say that they believe that our ethics should be constructed with the view of making a contribution to the good and welfare of human beings on humanity in general. However, there are in fact many competing brands of humanism in the marketplace of ideas. So there is not only a single humanism that people can take. There are many options in the marketplace of ideas. That's why defining the terminologies properly is crucial when we enter this broad discussion surrounding the subject of humanism. But broadly speaking, it means a commitment to the good of human beings. So that is how I would define humanism. It is a moral and ethical commitment to the good and welfare of humanity. It is a standard of morality that finds the well-being of most people, or even some would extend that to other conscious creatures, and it is its positive aim to contribute to the well-being of people and even conscious creatures if there are other conscious creatures in addition to human beings. And therefore its negative aim is is to minimize unnecessary pain. So that is what humanism is. But there are, as I have said, different types of humanism actually. And there are three specific types that enjoy an abundance of proponents in our day. So there is the humanism in religions. So these are particular religions that are highlighting the humanistic aspects of their faith. In that sense, we can speak of a Christian humanism, humanistic Buddhism. So these are religions that are not that perhaps are in its traditional forms, but they are highlighting that they are committed to the same ethic of providing welfare and contributing to the good of human beings. Then there is religious humanism, and this is different from humanism in religions. When we say religious humanism, it is a particular brand of humanism that actually rejects the supernatural basis of religion. So it can actually be atheistic in the sense that those who are proponents of religious humanism would not necessarily say that they believe in God, they believe in the spiritual world, but they would say that they are proponents of the ethics that are contained in the traditional forms of our major religions, but they deny the supernatural element. So they would commit themselves to the humanistic ideal that all religions are seeking to achieve without necessarily embracing the supernatural elements of those religions. So Albert Einstein is actually a proponent of such kind of religious humanism. John Dewey, among many others in history. So that is religious humanism. And then thirdly, there is secular humanism, and that is our focus for this evening. It is an offshoot of religious humanism, but instead of saying that we should already break away from traditional, from the supernatural elements of traditional religion, those who are proponents of secular humanism would actually say that we already need to break away from traditional religion in general. So after all, they claim we do not really have to stick with these foundations, because we can achieve the humanists' ideal using our reason and science without any claim or any attachment to traditional religious beliefs. So they believe that we can establish a humanism simply on the basis of reason and empirical science, and therefore they want an ethics that is atheistic and separate from any religious claims. So those are the types of humanism, and as I have said, we will focus on secular humanism. So formally defined, secular humanism is a moral prescription that finds human flourishing as its ultimate aim to be realized by reason, science, and technology without the need for appeal to a religious dogma. So it is a morality that is committed to the flourishing of mankind, of the human individual and the human collective. But this is not to be done by any appeal to religious dogma. We can achieve this just by the basis of our independent, autonomous reasoning, empirical science, and our technology. And this is often founded on worldviews that I think you will tackle some of this, so I will not dwell too much on these worldviews. Atheism, but a new kind of atheism. This is often called new atheism. There are four horsemen of new atheism. This is the contemporary atheism that is really possessed of a critical, very critical view of traditional religion. Most of the atheists in the past, traditional atheists, would say we need religion, it is useful, but we can no longer believe in the reality of God. New atheism is the brand of atheism today that says religion is not useful at all. In fact, they believe that it is a negative contribution to human society, and they often set themselves against the existence of traditional religion. So that is new atheism. And then there is the worldview of positivism, and this is influenced by Auguste Comte, a secular humanist who believed that what is experienced is the only ultimate reality. And therefore, when it is applied to ethics, reason and experience are regarded as the exclusive tools for us to discover the rules for human behavior. We do not need to appeal to any God or to any revelation. So these are the roots of secular humanism. And let me just quote from two proponents, major proponents of secular humanism today, in order for us to get a grasp of how these proponents think of secular humanism, how they express it in their writings. There is Sam Harris, He is actually one of the so-called four horsemen of new atheism, contemporary atheism. And this is what he said in The Moral Landscape. The Moral Landscape is a book where Sam Harris sought to demonstrate that we do not need religion in order to craft our moral standard. We only need our reason and our scientific findings. And this is what he said. The question of how human beings should live in the 21st century has many competing answers, and most of them are surely wrong. Only a rational understanding of human well-being will allow billions of us to coexist peacefully, converging on the same social, political, economic, and environmental goals. A science of human flourishing may seem a long way off, but to achieve it, we must first acknowledge that the intellectual terrain actually exists. So you can see his advocacy. Sam Harris believes that we can actually take the path, the intellectual path of creating our own moral standard based on reasoning and based on scientific research. And he actually he expressed very high hopes of what secular humanism can actually achieve, and it is nothing short of a utopia where there is a peaceful coexistence of mankind on the basis of such secular morality. So that is Sam Harris, another key thinker in our day, a leader, a leading thinker in such secular humanism is Steven Pinker, and he has written a book called Enlightenment Now, and it is a demonstration, it is a defense for the scientific enlightenment, and he believes that the answer is going to be found there in order for us to continue on progress in our pursuit of progress as human beings. And this is what he said: progress consists of deploying knowledge to allow all of humankind to flourish in the same way that each of us seeks to flourish. The goal of maximizing human flourishing, life, health, happiness, freedom, knowledge, love, richness of experience may be called humanism. It is humanism that we should try to achieve with our knowledge. It provides the ought that supplements the is. It distinguishes true progress from mastery. So he is saying that it is actually the progress of humanity that should be the aim, the goal of all our research and all of our advances in technology. So he is assuming that the moral commitment to the good of humanity is should be the driving motivation of knowledge and progress. So those are just the two thinkers, and I believe that sufficiently answers the question, what is secular humanism? Let us now consider answering the second question, why secular humanism is a myth. This is my belief that humanism on secular grounds is actually a myth. It is not possible to have a commitment to the good of human beings that is not founded on a religious commitment, especially, as I will argue later in a Christian commitment. So I will answer this along two lines of arguments. First, consider the is and ought gap. And this is already hinted at earlier with the statement of Steven Pinker saying that it is humanism that is the ought which supplements the is. So what is the is and ought gap? When we say is statements, we are referring to statements of facts, meaning these are brute facts, raw, uninterpreted truth of nature. And then when we speak of ought statements, these are prescriptions of moral behavior. When we say that a woman is a human, so that is an is statement. The ought statement are statements where we are imposing a moral standard. So those are the difference. So an example of an is statement is only the female human is capable of bearing children. So that is a statement of facts. We can say that it is a brute fact. Now, to say that you can draw an ought statement from that without any appeal to religion is an impossibility. So for example, when you say that only the female human being is capable of bearing children, can you then say that the female human ought to bear children always? Well, as far as logic is concerned, there is no connection between the is and the ought. It doesn't mean that something is, then it follows that another thing ought to be. So only the female human is capable of bearing children. It does not follow from that the female human ought to bear children always. So the is and the ought cannot be connected unless there is some leap of faith that bridges the ought towards the is. So in secular thinking, meaning in a kind of thinking that doesn't appeal to anything religious, that doesn't appeal to the reality of God and the reality of his revelation, there is really no way to draw a moral ought from a bare is statement. That means secular humanism is actually a myth. You cannot draw an ought of commitment to humanity without making a claim that is religious, and that is a commitment that is done within the confines of a religious faith. And this is the problem with many secular humanists actually, because they are quite confident in their assertions that there is no real is and ought gap. They say the is, we can take an ought from an is statement, and you have seen that expressed in the quotations that I have read earlier. And this is also true in the case of the Secular Humanist Declaration, which is a formal document signed by many secular humanists in our day, leading secular humanist thinkers. And this is what they said. Secularists deny that morality needs to be deduced from religious belief, or that those who do not espouse a religious doctrine are immoral. For secular humanists, ethical conduct is or should be judged by critical reason, and their goal is to develop autonomous and responsible individuals capable of making their own choices in life based upon an understanding of human behavior. So the claim is actually quite confident that secularists do not need religious belief in order to justify their moral claims. And again, I don't think that they have demonstrated a clear bridge between is and ought statements. And that is, I believe, something that they cannot actually do. And how do secular humanists get away from this? How are they able to say that they can make ought statements from is statements? Well, I think I bring to criticisms in what they often do. And the first is they are guilty of begging the question. So in the secular humanists attempt to justify their morality, they often commit the fallacy that is called begging the question. When we say begging the question, they are not really they are giving the appearance of answering the question, but they are not really answering the question of how the oughts and the is are joined together in their moral assertions. And they do this by separating the goal of humanism from the means of achieving humanism. When they say that when they say that we can actually promote humanism just by the basis of science and reason, what they actually mean is that science and reason can help us achieve as humanism as means, but whether humanism is a prescribed goal is actually assumed, meaning they exercise a commitment that is simply assumed on the basis of their moral sense without actually justifying it by reason, by science, or by any research. The means is what they say as the reason and science are the means to achieve humanism, but they have not really proven that humanism is something that we can all unite together as an unquestionable goal. So while they are sufficiently able to say that we have scientific means to achieve humanism, humanism itself as a prescribed moral goal remains unjustified. So as far as the moral goal is concerned, it is simply assumed as self-evident, meaning it is assumed as something that is a religious commitment rather than a product of science or reason or autonomous reasoning. And a representative of this, again, is Sam Harris. Well, listen to what he said in his arguments in The Moral Landscape. He said, if we are actually concerned about human well-being and would treat children as to promote it, we might wonder whether it is generally wise to subject little boys and girls to pain, terror, and public humiliation as a means of encouraging their cognitive and emotional development. Is there any doubt that this question has an answer? Is there any doubt that it matters that we get it right? In fact, all the research indicates that corporal punishment is a disastrous practice leading to more violence and social pathology, and perversely to greater support of more corporal punishment. Actually, there is a failure to really answer the question in the statement of Sam Harris there, because what he is simply saying is that research shows that withholding corporal punishment is better for the flourishing of children. That is what he is claiming, at least. And yet what he has not proven is whether we should pursue the flourishing of children. In other words, it is just assumed as a religious commitment, as a commitment within the confines of faith, without any justification that is rooted from on secular grounds. So there is a kind of begging the question that happens in their statement. So all that he was able to say is that we can use science to guide us, to help us in promoting the flourishing of children. There are research that are available. That is all that he was able to say. But the question of why we ought to care for the well-being of children is assumed simply as self-evident without any attempt to justify it at all. So when secular humanists claim that we can have a justification for morality on rational and scientific grounds, they usually refer only to the process of achieving those moral goals. The means can be aided by scientific and rational grounds, but the goals themselves are assumed as a matter of faith, as an unjustified claim. So, there's that problem. I will just skip this to more sayings of Sam Harris. He was saying that science can give us aught, and yet, sorry, and yet all that he was able to say is that science can only give us means in order to achieve what we already predetermined as ought. So there is no basis for humanism on secular grounds. So that is the first thing. Another is they commit the fallacy that is called non-sequitur. When we say non-sequitur, the conclusion doesn't follow the premises, meaning they conclude something that is not actually drawn from the premise of their argument. And this happens when they impose a moral conclusion on a statement of fact that does not necessarily and logically proceeds from the facts. So what happens is that their derived moral prescription is actually floating over the statement of facts and not standing upon it. Well, let me just give you an example to demonstrate that. And this is Steven Pinker, again, in a debate on Unbelievable, the big conversation with Nick Spencer, Nick Spencer claims that he is a Christian humanist. And this is what Steven Pinker said. So, he said, humanism is grounded in our universal humanity. The facts that we're made of the same stuff, we're the same species. We are all sentient. We all have the capacity to experience pleasure and pain. We all have the capacity to reason. So he is making statements of is, that is, we're the same species, we're made of the same stuff, etc. Therefore, we should care for one another. Actually, it is a non sequitur, because there is no, if you are just basing it on logic, there is no logical connection between being made of the same stuff, the stuff that makes us human beings, and caring for one another. It is a conclusion that is not really drawn from the premise. In fact, many within the animal kingdom are made of the same stuff, and yet they do not care for one another. They actually kill each other, and we can say that it's just nature. So the statement of ought is floating from a statement of facts, and there is no logical connection that really bridges the two. And they get away from that kind of statements, and it is not really something that is logical. So what happens is that the facts of being of the same species does not logically lead to the conclusion that an individual should care for another individual, at least outside of religious thinking, outside of religious commitments. So the moral prescription is imposed rather than drawn from the facts. So it is not really what they claim those statements to be, statements of science. That those are not statements of science. Those are statements of faith. Those are beliefs that are being assumed as self-evident religiously, rather than being claimed on the basis of an autonomous reason. So the secular humanists' attempt to justify their morality through reason and science is nothing but a great leap of faith from a statement of fact to a moral prescription. So humanism is first assumed, and then it is imposed on what they call bare facts, and that is something that is inconsistent with their claim of reason. My second critique is that they are guilty of a borrowed ethics. So they are borrowing their ethics. And by that, what I mean is they are constructing a moral standard that doesn't really issue from their worldview. So if secular humanists are going to construct an ethics on secular grounds, meaning non-religious grounds, even atheistic grounds, well, they should go back to the moral drawing board and produce their ethics based on the hard facts of their secular worldview. But what they do instead is that they borrow their morality from a religious worldview, and I claim specifically from a Christian worldview, and then they try to fit it inside their non-Christian worldview. So as I have demonstrated in the preceding arguments, secular humanists failed to deduce morality actually possible. But if they are going to construct their morality, there are other foundational elements in their conventional secularist worldview that they often just dismiss as sources of ethics. For example, evolutionism. Most of secular humanists believe in evolution. And rather than a commitment to the good of your fellow human being, shouldn't evolution prescribe the survival of the fittest? After all, it's just the bare facts of history within their worldview. As they claim, Homo sapiens is proposed to have annihilated the Neanderthals, and that is how they propelled the evolution and the victory of humankind. So why not just stick to survival of the fittest, because that is more consistent with a secularist worldview, rather than insisting on a humanism which cannot be claimed on the grounds of secularism. And then another is chance. They believe that there is no design and there is no transcendent value because everything began by the force of chance rather than intelligent design. And if that is the case, everything is just valueless matter. And therefore, why should we value each other if we are just moving stardusts? Or why should we claim a higher claim to human life if we are just philosophers who were once fishes? So the ethics, they are borrowing an ethics that do not belong to their worldview, because if they are to ground their ethics coming from the principles of their own worldview, well, they will have terrible ethics. So there is a borrowing that happens. So instead of building a principle of conduct from their own presuppositions based in their own worldviews, secular humanists borrow from the Christian idea of the inherent dignity of individual human beings, but they are removing its religious justification. And that is why I believe that secular humanism is actually a myth. Now, let us answer the last question, and this is actually a claim. This is my proposition. Christianity is the only justification for true humanism. And again, let me remind you that I define humanism in the sense of that moral commitment to the good of our fellow human beings, the human individual and the human collective. And I believe that you can only consistently maintain such a position within the Christian worldview. Why? Because it is in the Christian revelation, in the biblical revelation, that we are told that man is created in the image of God. In Genesis 1 verse 26 to 27, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, etc. So here we have a clear teaching of a religious reality, a truth that is divinely revealed and corroborated by facts, that God created human beings as his image bearers, both individually and collectively. And from that we take the moral prescription that we need to exercise respect to the inherent dignity of humanity, because each human being is created in the image of God. And Genesis 9 verse 6, you have the statement given in the Noahic covenant that whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed, for God made man in his own image. So there is an inherent value in human life because man is created in the image of God, and therefore we should seek justice for man. And again, that is based on that religious truth that human beings are created in the image of God. James 3 verse 9, with the tongue we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse people who are made in the likeness of God. This is a rebuke to those who use their tongue as an insult to their fellow human beings, and yet use their same tongue in worshiping God. And what that implies is that the malevolent infliction of harm upon another human being, whether verbal or actual physical harm, this is inconsistent with the doctrine that human beings are created in the image of God. And Matthew 7 verse 12, so whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. So the humanistic ideal of fellowness, ethics, is justified only within a biblical faith. So again, I hope this bolstered to us the claim that in secular humanism, in secularism, there is no claim for humanism. It is only Christianity that justifies such a commitment to the good and welfare of human beings. So Christian faith is the only stable ground on which the dignity of man can securely stand. That is why in the founding, in the American Declaration of Independence, we are familiar with those famous words. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There was no attempt to justify the truth that men are created equal by their Creator, because it is assumed simply as a religious reality, not as something that is still on the table up for debate, because you cannot build a society where the dignity of the individual citizens are still up for debate, still to be debated by science and research and reasoning. These are self-evident truths, and the basis is because they are created and they have a Creator that created them with dignity and rights that are not bestowed by any institution, and therefore cannot be taken by any institution. So only a society that accepts as inviolable the principle of individual human dignity is a fertile ground for human flourishing. And in a worldview where only the scientific method is unquestionable, the inherent dignity of human beings is never secure. And to end this talk, let me quote from Francis Schaeffer in his book Escape from Reason. People today are trying to hand on to the dignity of man, and they do not know how to, because they have lost the truth that man is made in the image of God. And I propose to you that secular humanism is such kind of an attempt to still hand on to the belief that human beings are dignified and therefore we should commit to the flourishing of human beings. But it is a myth, because they have forgotten and they have rejected the truth of divine revelation that man is made in the image of God. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your talk, Pastor Joseph. We'll now move on to our Q&A portion, but just a few reminders first. Please keep your questions short and to the point so that we can have more time for as many questions as possible. Please avoid asking questions regarding very specific cases that might involve sharing private information. For live questions, please use Zoom's raise hand function to be acknowledged by the moderator, or send them through the Zoom chat or privately to our RCM host, Brother Jonathan. Those joining via FB Live may ask questions by sending them in the comment section or by sending a private message to the RCM Facebook page. Pastor Joseph, we have one question here po, no? What are your thoughts on Christian humanists? So Christian humanists are those Christians who nominally belong to a Christian denomination, but who take inspiration from human experience rather than church dogma.
Sorry, can you repeat just repeat the whole?
Sige pa. What are your thoughts on Christian humanists? So ang definition daw po nun is Christian humanists are those Christians who nominally belong to a Christian denomination but who take inspiration from human experience rather than church dogma.
I think that's one reason why I tried to define my terminology quite clearly. And by humanism, I am specifically dealing with the moral ethic or moral standard or ethic that says we should be committed to the good and welfare of the human individual, specifically, and the human collective corporately. So in that sense, I would define the Christian humanist as someone who is committed to the same ideal, that we should pursue the good of our fellow human beings based on the Christian truth that our fellow human beings are created in the image of God. So in that sense, I would say that I accept the tenets of Christian humanism. But there are Christians who are humanistic in their philosophy, and usually what that means is there is a classic statement by I believe Pythagoras, when he said man is the measure of all things. And the humanism in that sense means making man as the center of our view of the world and even our ethical prescriptions. And that I would reject, because I believe that that the foundation of our ethics first and foremost is the holy character of God. So we have a God-centered worldview and a God rooted ethics rather than a man-centered one, which is usually how humanism is defined, placing man at the center of all things. And that kind of humanism I reject.
Okay, thank you, Pastor Joseph. Here's another question po. What is the explanation or view of secular humanists to guilt?
Uh, um, I don't think I have specific answers to that. I think I can say how they would try to process guilt. They certainly would not appeal to a biblical or any religious revelation that speaks of a guilt as something that is incurred uh, because of our sin against a thrice holy God. Guilt would then be just an experience, an experience, a psychological experience that is to be remedied by psychological means. So whether guilt is good, whether guilt is bad, I don't think that secular humanists would have a clear dogma about that, but they would process such human experiences like guilt without any appeal to the divine and to God's revelation. They would process those things on the basis of just merely psychological research, etc. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Pastor Joseph. Again, we would like to encourage everyone to raise questions, or you can also share your thoughts via Zoom or via FB po, no? So Pastor, we have another question here po. What principles, values, or beliefs do you think are shared by both Christians and secular humanists?
Primarily the commitment to the good and welfare of human beings. I believe that if humanism is narrowly defined or broadly defined that way, that we are to be committed to the good and welfare of human beings, then certainly we share that same value. If it becomes more narrowly defined, like what I said earlier, humanism being defined as man being the center of all things, then we would reject that value because we believe that it is God who is at the center of all things in the Christian worldview. So the shared commitment to the good of human beings is the shared value. Although what I have demonstrated, I hope in my paper, is that they do not have justification for that value. It is their religious commitment, although they deny having such a religious commitment. They do not have that justification. The Christian has a justification for that because we believe that human beings are created in the image of God, and that is where the dignity of human being springs as a reality.
Okay, thank you po, Pastor. We have another question here po. Do secular humanists have a concept of accountability? To whom or to what are they accountable?
I don't think they would not be accountable to God, and that is one of their. I think that that question points to a real dilemma for secular humanists. So, to whom are they accountable? So, what if I decide to violate humanistic principles? So what? There is no God anyway, and all that they could do is to punish me by law, but it cannot be defined as sin to sin to God. Yeah, that is a real dilemma for a secular humanist. There is a morality, but there is no accountability, and that means there is no final justice to straighten out the violations against their moral prescriptions.
Follow up to that po, no, on the question on accountability. If there is no accountability, then man or secular humanists do not count. Do you agree with this?
I don't know what it do not count.
Opo, yun yung nakalagay dito. Then man or secular humanists do not count. Value of man. Wait.
I'm sorry. I think I need that to be more elaborate. Maybe what what he or she is asking is or saying is, if there is no accountability, then the moral claims of the secular humanists are useless and without worth. So practically, I would say that there is some worth, because I would rather have an inconsistent secularist rather than a consistent secularist who would operate on the basis of survival of the fittest. So I would rather have an inconsistent secular humanist who is committed to my welfare, rather than a secularist who operates on the basis of the belief that no one is valuable, and we are just moving stardust, and therefore it doesn't matter what they do to me or what I do to them. I don't. So practically, I think it is not worthless. I believe that their commitment to humanity, to the good of the human individual and the good of the human collective, is still a common grace. It is the presence of a working conscience, as Romans chapter 2 verse 14 declares, that even those who reject God, those who are without God, they are still able to operate with a working moral sense, including the belief that we should do good things to our fellow human beings, even though they are without justification for that. So it is a common grace, I would say. But as far as the worldview is concerned, I would say that it is useless, because they cannot account for their moral commitment to the human being on the basis of their own secularist worldview.
All right, thank you, Pastor Joseph. So those are the questions for tonight's session. So thank you again for answering the questions and for your talk. Pastor Joseph discussed with us tonight humanism, particularly focusing on secular humanism and its implications on the Christian faith.